The wind blew cold through the open eating yard of the academy. It was lunchtime, and students sat in neat rows, laughing and eating warm meals. But far away from them, near the metal trash bins, a young alien girl named Salna sat alone. Her tray was placed on her lap. The food inside already cold. She didn't say anything, didn't look at anyone. She just sat there quietly, chewing slowly, trying not to cry. Her skin was a soft gray color, with small violet markings on her cheeks, but those markings were faded, like they didn't belong. She was born of mixed blood, half Vendari, half something else. That something else made the others call her dirty. No one wanted to sit near her, not even the teachers. She had no friends. Only whispers behind her back and cruel smiles to her face. Each day, she was forced to sit beside the garbage area, not by the rules, but by unspoken law, tradition. If she tried to sit at a table, the others would get up and leave, so she stopped trying long ago. Even her food was given late, after everyone else had already gone through the line. Today was no different, or so she thought, until a new figure entered the yard. A boy, tall and pale, wearing a human academy uniform. His name was Evan, a transfer from Earth, and this was his first day at the academy. Evan looked around. Confused by the layout, he noticed how one side of the yard was full, tables packed with students, but in the far corner, a girl sat alone beside rusted trash bins. She was holding her food like it didn't matter. No one even looked at her. He frowned and started walking, expecting someone to wave him over, but no one did. In fact, when they saw him looking at the girl in the corner, some students whispered. A taller alien boy said loudly, "Better not sit with the trash, human." Laughter followed, but Evan didn't laugh. Instead, he turned and walked toward Salna. Every eye in the yard turned to follow him. Salna saw him coming. Her hands froze, her eyes wide in fear. She thought maybe he was coming to tease her too. Or worse, throw food like the others sometimes did. But Evan didn't stop. He walked right up to her, looked down for a moment, and then slowly sat beside her on the ground. He placed his tray on his knees and opened it. "Hi," he said softly. "I'm Evan." Salna didn't answer at first. She looked around, sure that someone would yell. Sure that someone would drag him away. The yard had gone completely silent. Every student stared, every mouth hung open. Then someone shouted from the tables, "He's eating with the half-blood." Another voice laughed, "Human must be broken." Evan kept eating like he didn't hear them. Salna blinked slowly, unsure what to do. No one had ever done this before. No one had ever spoken to her kindly in the open. She whispered, "You can't sit here. They'll hurt you." Evan shrugged. "Let them try." He took a bite, then offered her a piece of fruit from his tray. She stared at it for a long moment, then slowly took it with shaking fingers. It was warm, fresh, nothing like the cold leftovers she usually got. The teachers looked on, but none of them moved. They didn't want to get involved. This was how things were, and no one questioned it until now. Salna looked at Evan again, confused and afraid. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are you doing this?" He smiled, because no one deserves to eat beside trash bins. And just like that, something inside Salna cracked, not in pain, but in hope. In that moment, for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't something to avoid. Someone saw her and sat beside her anyway. But behind them, anger was growing. Some students stood up, their eyes burning with fury. One of the elite boys threw his tray onto the floor. "Get away from her, human." But Evan didn't flinch, didn't move. He simply looked at Salna and said, "You want to leave?" She shook her head slowly. "No," and together, they kept eating side by side, as the academy watched in silence. The rule had been broken, and nothing would be the same again. The day after the lunch incident, the academy halls were buzzing with whispers. Not even the oldest students could remember a time when someone had openly broken the silent caste rule. The human had done something unthinkable. He sat with the impure. And now, everything felt off balance. Salna walked through the corridors with her head slightly higher than usual, but her heart beat fast with worry. Everyone looked at her. Some with disgust, some with curiosity, and a few with something close to fear. No one said anything directly, but she could feel the storm building around her. Evan, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered. He walked beside her casually. As if nothing unusual had happened, he smiled at the cleaning droids, nodded at a teacher who blinked at him in disbelief, and even asked Salna about her favorite food as if they were two ordinary friends on a normal day. But nothing was normal anymore. At lunchtime, Salna didn't go to her usual spot near the bins. She just stood there, tray in her hands, unsure where she should be now. Evan walked in a few minutes later, carrying 2 trays this time, one in each hand, and without a word. He motioned toward the edge of the yard where there was a patch of sun. She followed him, still afraid, but her feet moved on their own. They sat there together again, and once more the crowd froze. But this time, no one shouted, no one laughed. They only watched. Then came the eyes, the real danger. From one of the academy towers, a pair of tall, golden-robed instructors stared down at them through tinted glass. One of them pressed a silent alarm, marking the human's name for review. The other simply whispered, "He's becoming a problem." Later that evening, Evan returned to his dorm and found something odd on his door. Scratched deep into the metal was a single symbol. A curved claw above a circle. Salna saw it when she came to visit and gasped. "Do you know what this means?" she asked, her voice shaking. Evan shook his head. "Should I?" "It means someone from the highborn caste has noticed you," she said. "They think you're challenging the old laws." "I am," Evan replied without blinking. "Aren't you?" Salna looked at him, really looked at him, trying to understand what kind of creature he was. He wasn't afraid, or maybe he was, and just didn't show it. But either way, he stood taller than anyone she'd ever known. "You should stop," she said quietly. "They'll punish you, maybe send you away." He leaned against the door, eyes thoughtful. "Maybe? But if I stop, then what?" "You go back to eating with the trash." Salna lowered her gaze. "It's better than seeing you hurt because of me." "No, it's not," Evan said. "It's not better for either of us for a long moment." Silence stretched between them, filled with everything they didn't say. The next morning, the tension grew thicker. Some students started moving away from Evan in the halls. A few began whispering when he passed, and others looked at Salna like she was poison. Yet neither of them backed down. Then came the note. Folded inside Evan's locker was a piece of paper, handwritten in shaky ink. It read, "Stop sitting with her, or we'll stop you ourselves." Human. He showed it to Salna, who immediately panicked. "You have to go to the headmaster." He smiled. "Why?" "They probably wrote it." Her eyes widened. "You really don't care, do you?" "I care," he said softly. "But I'm not scared of cowards hiding behind threats." That day he sat with her again, but this time something changed. One of the younger students, small alien boy with patchy skin and nervous eyes, picked up his tray and walked toward them. The crowd gasped, waiting to see what would happen. The boy hesitated, looked back at the others, then sat beside Salna on the ground, silent but determined. Evan looked over and nodded. "Welcome." Salna's lips trembled as she offered the boy half her bread, her fingers shaking, but her heart slowly lifting. Something was starting, something real, but above, behind tinted windows, angry eyes watched again. And someone wrote a name on a different list, not just Evan's this time, but Salna's too. She had gone from invisible to dangerous, and danger would not go unnoticed for long. That night, the academy's halls were quiet, but the silence felt heavy. Like something was waiting in the shadows, Evan sat on his narrow bed, staring at the scratched symbol still marked on his dorm door. The warning hadn't faded, it had deepened. The air recycling system hummed softly, but every now and then, strange clicking echoed in the corridor outside, like metal claws tapping the floor. Evan didn't move, didn't open the door, but his eyes stayed fixed on the handle, hand resting. Near a small wrench he kept under his pillow, just in case. At the same time, Salna sat curled on the floor of her own room, staring at the single plant she kept alive in a cracked cup. Her fingers ran over the edge of a note, not the threat Evan had shown her, but a different one. One slipped under her door hours after sunset. It was short, cold, and final. "Speak again, and we cut your tongue." She didn't know who wrote it, but the handwriting was neat, formal, from someone educated. Someone important. Her hands trembled, but inside her chest, something else stirred. Not fear. Not anymore. It was fire. A small spark she didn't know she still had the next morning. The halls were different, too quiet. Students whispered more than usual, but didn't laugh. They looked over their shoulders, avoiding the center path of the corridor. And when Evan entered the dining yard, his name had already been carved into one of the benches with a slash through it. Salna arrived a few minutes later and froze, her eyes on the mark, her shoulders tense. "They want to make an example of us." She said, "They can try," Evan replied, then smiled. "I don't mind eating on the floor anyway." They sat just like before, but it wasn't the same anymore. The silence around them felt sharp now, like a wire pulled too tight, and somewhere in the crowd, someone waited for the right moment to cut it. It happened later that day, just after their advanced species history class. Evan stepped into the corridor and heard footsteps behind him. Fast. Too many for just one person. Then pain. Something struck the back of his head, hard, sending him stumbling forward. Before he could turn, another blow hit his ribs, and someone hissed, "You don't belong here, human." 3 elite students in dark uniforms surrounded him, their faces hidden behind ceremonial masks. Fists clenched. One held a short, stun rod used for discipline, but not at this power level. Evan raised his hands, not to beg, but to guard. He tried to speak, but they didn't care. They moved like they'd done this before, practiced, precise. But what they didn't expect was Salna. She came from the corner with a sound like a scream and a flame in her hand. A student light tool, but she used it like a weapon. Swinging it hard into the side of the largest attacker's face, he cried out, stumbling, and the others turned just in time to see her shove Evan behind her, eyes glowing in rage, voice shaking, but loud. "Touch him again, and I will burn this." Whole academy down. The hallway froze. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. One attacker hissed, "You're just filth." Salna didn't flinch. Maybe? But this filth bites back now. A crowd had gathered by then, students watching, teachers pretending not to see, and somewhere among them, a camera drone blinked to life, quietly recording it all. The attackers backed off, melting into the crowd. But their message had been delivered. Stop or suffer. Salna knelt beside Evan, checking his ribs, brushing the blood from his lip, her hands gentle but steady. "You should have run," she whispered. He looked at her through the pain and smiled. "If I ran, who'd sit with you tomorrow?" And just like that, the fire in her chest roared to life again. But above them, the drone hummed, uploading the footage, and far away. In the high offices of the Academy Council, alarms silently flashed red. Because now, the problem wasn't just about caste. Now, the human and the half-blood had become a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. The sun was low behind the Academy's glass spires, casting long shadows over the central courtyard. A place once used for ceremonies and announcements, today it had been decorated with gold streamers, velvet banners, and glowing lanterns for the annual Founders Banquet, an event where only the purest bloodlines were honored. Salma stood just outside the banquet hall, her hands tightly clenched around a cleaning cloth. She hadn't been invited, of course. No one of tainted heritage ever was. Instead, she had been handed a mop and told to scrub the outer tiles. Before the guests arrived, she didn't complain. She never did. Not aloud, but inside her chest. Something had started to feel wrong, like a bone that had healed crooked and now ached every time she moved. Inside, the room was already full, glittering with soft music, laughter, and the smell of rich, exotic food. Every seat was taken by noble-born students, high-ranking staff, and chosen guests, and there, seated near the edge, was Evan, dressed in a standard uniform with no medals, no ribbons, and no smile. He had only been allowed in after a long debate between the elders, but it was clear he was not welcome. His plate sat untouched, the seat beside him empty, and the others spoke around him, as if he were invisible. Evan stared at his tray, then slowly raised his eyes toward the large crystal windows where Salna's shadow moved beyond the glass, wiping each pane with silent precision. He stood up without a word, lifted his tray, and began to walk. His footsteps echoed as the music slowed, heads turned, whispering began again. The High Chancellor raised his brow. "Where are you going, human?" Evan didn't answer him. He just walked across the banquet floor, through the towering doors, and out into the cold. Salna didn't notice him at first. She was busy scrubbing a stain from the tiles, her back to the doors, until she heard the click of shoes behind her and turned. He stood there, holding his tray, offering it like a gift. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly, confused. "They wouldn't let you in." He said simply, "So I'm coming out." She blinked, frozen. "But this is their feast. You'll get in trouble." "I'd rather be in trouble than surrounded by people who think worth is decided by birth." Then he sat down on the stone tiles beside her, placed the tray between them, and said, "Eat with me." She looked at the tray, filled with the finest food she'd ever seen. Dishes she used to serve but never taste. Her throat tightened, but before she could speak, the doors behind them slammed open. A sharp voice echoed through the courtyard. "This is a sacred event. It will return to your place at once." The High Chancellor stormed out, his gold robes fluttering like angry flames. Behind him, other nobles followed, their expressions twisted in rage and disbelief. "You disgrace the founder's table," he barked, pointing at Evan, "and you." His eyes landed on Salna like venom. "You are not even allowed to be here." Evan stood slowly, brushing dust from his pants, but his voice remained calm. "Then maybe the founders built the wrong table." Gasps rippled through the crowd behind the Chancellor. One noble girl dropped her glass. Others looked at each other in shock. No one had ever spoken back like that, especially not a guest. "You will be punished for this," the Chancellor said coldly. Severely, Evan turned, picked up the tray, and gently handed it to Salna. "Eat what you want," he said softly, "then we'll go." She didn't move, didn't blink, her hands trembling as she held the tray like it might vanish. She had dreamed of this food since she was a child, not just the taste, but what it meant. The Chancellor stepped forward, but before he could speak again, a voice interrupted him, not Evan's this time. "I'll go with them." It was a student from one of the side tables, a boy with silver markings on his neck, a highborn. He walked forward, placed his medal on the ground, and stood beside Salna. Another voice followed, and another soon. For students had stepped away from the feast. The Chancellor's face twisted. "You fools. You'll lose everything." "Then maybe it was never worth anything," one of them replied. Salna looked up, stunned, her hands still wrapped around the tray, and for the first time she felt something she couldn't name. Not safety, not even hope, but the beginning of a storm that might, just might, break everything apart. Behind her, the banners still fluttered. The music had stopped, and the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter. She hadn't walked into the banquet, but the banquet had come to her. The sky above the academy turned deep blue as night fell, but the air didn't cool. It burned with whispers, judgment, and something far more dangerous than anger: fear. Not from the impure, but from those who had always been in control. Evan's name was posted on the disciplinary board the next morning. Red letters glowing across the top. Trial pending disruption of order. Students crowded around it, reading the charges, but no one spoke aloud. They didn't need to. The message was clear. Inside the administrative tower, Evan sat in a cold room, surrounded by tall stone walls and silent judges, robes brushing the floor like dry leaves. Salna wasn't allowed to enter. She stood outside, her hands pressed against the door, heart racing. She knew what these trials were. They didn't need truth, they only needed silence, and Evan. Evan was many things, but silent was not one of them. The lead judge stood and raised his voice. You, a visitor to our world, have disrespected our culture, rejected our laws, and corrupted the minds of our students. Evan sat still, unbothered, until the last line made him flinch. You dared treat an impure as your equal, and worse, inspired others to do the same. A murmur rose among the elders seated in shadowed rows. But Evan's voice cut through it, calm but sharp. Did you just say that like it's a crime? The room fell into stiff silence, but his words didn't stop there. I'm not here to fit into your system, he said. I'm here to break it before it breaks anyone else. The judge's eyes narrowed, and the sentence was quick. Brutal final warning. Human. You are to submit a public apology during tomorrow's assembly, or you will be expelled from this institution and returned to Earth in disgrace. They didn't let him speak again. 2 guards escorted him out, and as the doors opened, Salna stepped back, her eyes meeting his, searching his face for hope, but he gave her a soft smile and whispered one word. No. That evening, as the academy lights dimmed, Salna received her own summons. Not to a trial, but to the elder matron's chamber. She walked alone, knees shaking, entering the room where no half-blood had ever been called before. It smelled like incense and dust, and the old alien woman sitting at the center barely looked up. You will distance yourself from the human, she said flatly. You will speak against him during the assembly and remind everyone of your place. Salna's voice was barely a whisper. And if I don't? The matron's eyes sharpened like twin knives. Then you'll be cast out, stripped of your uniform and sent to the outer camps, where the impure scavenge to survive. She paused, then added cruelly, You'll go back to being dirt, child. And no one will ever sit beside you again. Salna's lips parted, but no sound came. The door closed behind her like a tomb. She didn't go back to her room that night. She wandered instead, down the lower halls where cleaning droids hummed and the walls didn't whisper lies. Her feet brought her to the fountain at the back of the academy, old, cracked, and forgotten, and there, sitting on the rim of the fountain, waiting, was Evan. I thought they might try to scare you, he said softly. She sat beside him, too tired to answer. The wind lifted her hair and scattered dry leaves across the stone. They're going to expel you. She finally said, I know, he replied. They told me to denounce you tomorrow, she whispered, to say you were dangerous, wrong, and foolish. He looked at her, quiet for a long time, then asked gently, And what will you say? Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I'll say I ate beside a human, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel less. The wind grew still. I'll say that if they cast you out, I'll walk out with you, she added. Even if I have to sleep in the snow. Evan blinked slowly, not used to hearing someone speak for him. Not after everything, not in a world that hated her for being born. They sat in silence, 2 exiles in waiting, as the stars blinked awake overhead. And somewhere deep within the academy's walls, a system error triggered quietly. An anonymous file had been uploaded to the Academy's broadcast system. It was queued, timestamped, and locked for public display at tomorrow's morning assembly. Its title, Not Dirt. No one had any idea what was coming, but by morning, everyone would know Salna's name. The Academy rose early that day. The sky above it dull and gray, as if the sun itself hesitated to shine. Word spread like wildfire through the student network. Something unexpected was about to happen at the assembly. No one knew what, but everyone felt it, like static in the air before a storm. The main amphitheater filled quickly. Rows of students filed in under the cold gaze of the elders and council heads. Banners fluttered. Guards stood still, as statues, and at the center stage 2 empty podiums waited. One for Evan, the other for Salna, the crowd whispered, eyes darting between the front and the doors. Some smirked, some looked nervous, and others waited for the punishment they had been promised. Then the screens flickered. It wasn't time yet, but suddenly every wall panel came to life. Every projection orb lit up, and the Academy seal was replaced by a glowing title. Not Dirt. Confused murmurs rose. Some teachers stepped forward to shut it down, but the system wouldn't respond. The file was locked, encrypted, and timed for full playback. The screen flashed, and then the footage began. It was a video, shaky but clear, taken from the corner of a corridor. It showed Evan being attacked. 3 masked elites beating him. Stun rod crackling, fists flying. Then Salna appeared in frame, screaming, hitting one attacker with a tool, pushing Evan behind her, her voice trembling but loud. Touch him again, and I will burn this whole academy down. Gasps echoed through the amphitheater. Students frozen in their seats. The recording kept playing. Her standing firm, bleeding, defying them, defending someone the world had told her to fear. Gate. Avoid. The video ended with a still image. Salna kneeling beside Evan, blood on her fingers, light in her eyes, and a whisper caught by the recorder. Who would sit with me tomorrow? The screen went dark. Silence followed, the kind that doesn't come from shock, but from something deeper, shame. Then the door at the back creaked open. Salna walked in slowly, her steps echoing off the polished floor. She wore her old uniform, sleeves too short, shoes scratched from years of cleaning floors, but her back was straight, her hands steady. She stepped up to the podium meant for Evan, who hadn't yet arrived, and looked out at the hundreds of students, elders and teachers who had ignored her 4 years. Her voice was quiet at first, then stronger with each word. You called me dirt because of my blood, because of something I didn't choose. You forced me to eat beside the trash because it made you feel higher. You told me to hate myself, and I did. For a long time, her eyes swept across the crowd. But then someone came and asked to sit beside me, not because he pitied me, but because he didn't believe I was less. You say he broke your laws, but maybe your laws were already broken. A few students lowered their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, jaws clenched, hearts racing. Salna paused, then stepped back. I was told to speak today and denounce him, she said softly, but I think he should speak for himself. And just like that, Evan walked in, his face bruised, his arm bandaged, but his walk steady. He stepped onto the stage, stood beside her, and didn't speak for a long time. Just looked out at them, not with hate, but with something far more dangerous: disappointment. You built a school to shape the future, he said, but your future has a broken spine. You're afraid of what you can't control, so you punish the ones who show courage. Your system protects the powerful, not the good. Teacher tried to rise, but the students around him didn't let him move. Not this time. Evan's voice dropped. I came here to learn, but instead, taught you something, that the one you cast out is the one you should have honored. He turned to Salna, and without a word, held out his hand. She took it, and together they walked down the steps of the stage toward the exit. No one moved to stop them, but behind them, something had cracked. Not loudly, but deeply. A soundless fracture through the heart of an old, cruel tradition, and in the silence that followed, a young girl in the back row quietly stood up, then another and another, until nearly a quarter of the student body stood, not clapping, not shouting, just standing, because sometimes silence says everything, and that morning it said, "We see you now." Snow began to fall on the academy grounds just days after the assembly, light at first, then thick enough to blanket the stone paths and cover the statues of old leaders whose names no one remembered anymore. Everything felt quiet, frozen, not just the weather, but the people the elders never spoke about. What happened? They didn't punish Evan, didn't exile Salna. They didn't dare. Not after the recording, not after the students stood. And definitely not after news of the incident leaked to the outer systems. In nearby cities, protests broke out, small at first, then larger, with signs reading things like "not dirt" and "sit with her." Hashtags appeared across the galactic net. A human blog told Salna's story, and within a week, her name was trending in more than one language inside the academy. Change came slowly and painfully. They didn't erase the caste system overnight, but the fear of punishment was gone. No one dared to mock Salna now, not openly, and some of the very students who used to laugh when she ate alone now avoided her gaze in the hall. She didn't want their pity. She didn't want their guilt. She wanted space to breathe and to figure out what came next. It was Evan who reminded her how to live one cold morning. He knocked on her door with 2 steaming cups and a scarf wrapped badly around his neck. His nose was red from the cold, and his hair full of snowflakes. "I think I broke the heating panel in my room," he said with a grin. "Mind if I borrow yours for a while?" She rolled her eyes but stepped aside, letting him in. They sat on the floor beside her old heater, the cups warming their hands. No grand speeches now. No rebellion in the air, just 2 people trying to be warm in a place that had always been cold. After a while, Evan leaned back and looked at her. "You ever think you'd be famous?" She snorted. "I used to pray no one would notice me at all." "Well," he said, sipping his drink, "you kind of started a cultural firestorm." She smiled softly. "You helped light it." He tilted his head. "Would have done it again?" That night the academy held its first shared meal, open seating. No caste markers, no separation, no one forced to eat outside or near bins. Salna stood at the entrance of the hall, holding a tray, the same as she had 100 times before. Only, this time, the tables were different. She walked past the spot where she used to hide, past the walls where insults once echoed, and stepped into the center of the room at one of the large tables near the middle. Evan was already seated, a spot saved beside him. No one stopped her, no one stared. In fact, as she passed, students moved their trays, opened space, gave small nods, not out of fear, but out of something new. Respect. She sat beside Evan, and for a long moment just looked at the tray. In her hands, "Warm," she whispered. Amazed, he glanced over the food. She shook her head. "No." "The room," he smiled, then quietly held out his hand under the table. Not needing words, she took it across the hall. A small group of younger students huddled around a holo tablet, replaying the video of Salna's stand for the 10th time. One whispered, "She's so brave," and another added, "Someday I'll sit beside her." And somewhere, in a hidden corner of the galaxy, an alien child of mixed blood, watching the footage from a refugee shelter, turned to their parent and asked, "Do you think someone would sit beside me too?" The parent watched Salna's face on the screen, calm, strong, shining through old pain, and answered, "They will now, because what started with a cold tray beside a trash bin ended with a seat at the center of everything. and a human who refused to look away.